They walked into the banquet hall as if they owned the place. Not a single flicker of guilt on their faces. Not even a pause. My parents, the same two people who slammed the door in my face when I was 17 and pregnant, were now strolling through the crowd in borrowed elegance, smiling as though nothing had ever happened. If you've ever felt abandoned, betrayed, or underestimated, this story is for you. Don't miss a single second, because what unfolds will leave you breathless. I didn't blink. I didn't gasp. I didn't even let my wine glass tremble in my hand. Because I had been waiting for this moment. Not for days. Not for weeks. For decades. And unlike them, I had come prepared. The hospital banquet was already alive with chatter. Forks clinking against porcelain, glasses being raised under chandeliers that spilled golden light across linen-covered tables. A jazz trio played softly in the corner, their music smooth enough to mask the low hum of ambition and pride in the air. I sat near the front, my son's name carved into the marble plaque just outside the room, the reason all these people had gathered tonight. But when I saw my parents step in, dressed in clothes that looked more expensive than anything they ever wore when I was a child, I felt the air tighten around me. It wasn't anger that rushed through my veins. It was something colder, steadier. My father's eyes scanned the room like a man searching for someone to impress. My mother's laugh rang too loudly, too polished as she tugged at the pearls around her neck. And then, there it was, the moment they spotted my son. He didn't notice them at first, too busy greeting colleagues who looked at him with admiration that still made my chest swell. But when my parents approached, I caught the flicker of confusion cross his face. He'd never met them. Never shaken their hands. Never called them by the names they had forfeited when they abandoned me. Dr. Whitman? My mother's voice was sugar-coated, the kind she used with neighbors when she wanted to sound respectable. We're your grandparents. The words nearly made me choke on my drink. Grandparents. As if titles could be stolen back as easily as slipping into rented clothes. I stayed seated. I wanted to watch. To let the scene play out, the first act of a performance they didn't know I had written for them long ago. I could see my son hesitate. He glanced toward me, eyebrows raised slightly as if to ask without words, "Is this true?" I gave him the faintest nod. Yes, they are who they claim to be. But the steel in my gaze told him more. Don't trust them. Not yet. My father extended a hand and my son shook it politely, his doctor's composure never faltering. My mother pressed a hand to her chest dramatically as if overwhelmed by pride. We always knew she'd raise you well, my mother said. The sentence was light, but her eyes darted toward me, sharp as though testing how far she could push. I didn't move. I let the words hang there like smoke. The speeches began shortly after, with the head of surgery taking the podium. Applause, laughter, the sound of knives slicing through prime rib. But I barely tasted the food in front of me. My focus was fixed on the two people across the table, sitting a little too straight, laughing a little too loudly. They didn't belong here. Yet they were trying to weave themselves into a story they had torn me out of. I remembered the night they kicked me out, how the screen door slammed behind me, how the winter air bit into my skin as I clutched the single bag they allowed me to take. My mother's words echoed in my head even now. You made your bed, now lie in it. And here they were, pretending they had given me anything but scars. I excused myself from the table halfway through the meal and walked toward the restroom. Not because I needed to leave, because I needed to think. The hallway was quieter, lined with framed photographs of surgeons in crisp coats, their faces serious and proud. My heels clicked softly against the tiles. I pressed my hands against the cool marble of the sink, staring at my reflection. 65 now. A face mapped with lines carved by years of struggle and resilience. I had thought this night would be simple, celebrating my son, honoring his success. But fate had decided to give me a stage I hadn't asked for. The question was, would I use it? I touched the small leather folder tucked inside my purse. My hidden advantage. My quiet weapon. They didn't know I had it. They didn't know I had been keeping records all these years. Copies of papers they'd signed, debts they'd left, documents that told a truth they'd buried. Not yet. I wasn't ready to show my hand. But soon. When I returned to the table, the hospital director was introducing my son. The applause swelled, echoing against the chandeliers, and I felt pride so deep it nearly broke me. He stood tall, shoulders squared, his voice steady as he spoke about hard work, sacrifice, and the importance of family. At that word, family, My parents leaned forward, smiling as though it included them. My stomach tightened. He glanced at me in the crowd, his eyes lingering on mine. I nodded slightly, letting him know I was here. Always had been. Always would be. My parents clapped the loudest when he finished, drawing attention to themselves as if they had any right. I could see other guests beginning to whisper, wondering who the strangers were. Dessert arrived, chocolate cake dusted with powdered sugar. My mother declined with a wave of her hand, saying loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "We don't eat sweets at our age. We've kept ourselves disciplined." I almost laughed. Discipline. If only these people knew the truth. As the staff refilled glasses, the master of ceremonies announced the next part of the evening, a chance for family members to speak. My heart beat slower, heavier. I hadn't planned to take the microphone, but now I knew I had to, as this was my moment. Not theirs. The microphone passed from table to table, each person saying a few kind words. When it reached me, I stood. My knees didn't shake. My voice didn't falter. The room quieted, dozens of eyes turning to me. I glanced at my parents, who were watching me with eager smiles, already imagining the praise I would throw their way. But I didn't smile back. I took a breath, let it out slowly, and began. "My name is Margaret," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the hall. "And I am his mother." The first few sentences were kind, about my son's dedication, his sleepless nights studying, the patience he had saved. But then, just when the tension eased, I let my words sharpen. When I was 17, I was told I had no place in my own home. I was told I was unworthy of love because I was expecting a child. I was cast out into the cold. Gasps. Forks clattered against plates. My son froze, staring at me. My parents stiffened. I didn't look at them. Not yet. "I raised him alone," I continued. "I worked nights. I starved so he could eat. I bled my hands raw cleaning offices no one remembers so he could study in schools that now honor his name. And I did it without the support of the two people sitting across from me tonight." Now I turned my head, my eyes locking with theirs. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's pearls shook slightly against her chest. The room was silent. Every heartbeat seemed to echo against the walls. And though I wanted to go further, to pull out the folder right then and there, I stopped. Because revenge isn't about rushing. It's about timing. I lowered the microphone slowly, letting the words linger in the air. My son stood frozen, his hand half raised toward me, caught between pride and shock. The applause didn't start. Not yet. The room was too stunned. I walked back to my chair, sat down calmly, and folded my hands over my lap. My parents wouldn't meet my eyes now. The laughter, the smiles, they were gone. And I smiled quietly to myself. Because this was only the beginning. I folded my hands in my lap, my smile small but steady. The air in the banquet hall still carried my words like smoke. My parents sat across from me, stiff and pale, pretending to sip from their glasses, though I could see the tremor in my mother's hand. The silence stretched, broken only when a fork clinked against porcelain at a distant table. Guests whispered in hushed voices, leaning toward one another. I could feel their curiosity circling me like a tide. And then, as if a weight had finally dropped, the applause came, not thunderous, not wild, but cautious, uncertain, the kind that asks, "What else is she hiding?" I didn't look at my parents again. Not yet. Instead, I looked at my son. His eyes, wide with both pride and confusion, locked on mine. I could tell he wanted to speak, to demand answers I'd never fully given him. But I simply lifted my glass, took a sip, and let the taste of dry red wine settle the storm in my chest. Because the truth wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. "Mom," my son whispered later, leaning close as murmurs filled the room. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" His voice was steady, but there was an edge of hurt. I touched his hand gently under the table. My skin against his felt thin, fragile, but my grip was firm. "Because some truths need the right stage," I answered softly. "And tonight you're finally ready to hear them." His brow furrowed, but he didn't push. That was his way, measured, patient, though I could see questions piling behind his eyes. The hospital director took back the microphone, awkwardly clearing his throat to move the program along. Someone at a table near the back tried to start small talk, laughter bubbling too loudly, desperate to cut through the heaviness. But the room never quite regained its easy rhythm. I sat back watching my parents pretend. My mother's lips curved into a smile she didn't mean. My father leaned toward another guest, murmuring something about old times, though he had no old times here. They were actors on a stage they didn't belong to. And I was the only one holding the script. The main courses cleared and the waiters brought coffee, the bitter smell drifting between tables. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, grounding myself in the heat. Memories rose uninvited. Nights of scrubbing motel floors until my knees ached. Long walks to a second-hand store, where I searched for clothes that would keep my son warm through winters we couldn't afford. The sting of humiliation when neighbors whispered, pity written on their faces. All while my parents never called. Never checked if I was alive. And now here they sat, draped in their borrowed dignity, trying to claim a share of my son's light. The microphone passed again, this time toward families who wanted to share stories about their loved ones working in the hospital. I listened politely at first, but my mind wasn't in their words. My chest tightened as I realized, this was my chance. Not to end it. Not yet. But to sharpen the blade. When the host reached our table again, he smiled uncertainly and held the microphone toward me. I took it without hesitation. My name, I began, voice steady, is Margaret. And I am his mother. The room hushed instantly. Even those who had heard me earlier leaned closer now, their curiosity sharpened by the tension. I didn't repeat myself. Repetition weakens truth. Instead, I peeled back another layer. When I left this town, I had nothing but the clothes on my back and the child I carried. I was told I was unworthy of love, unworthy of family, unworthy of even a roof. I worked nights in a diner where the grease never washed off my hands. I cleaned houses where I was invisible to the people who lived in them. And every penny I earned went into raising a boy who is now the man you celebrate tonight. I paused, letting the weight of it settle. My voice did not waver, but my throat tightened with the memory of exhaustion that still lived in my bones. I didn't have support. I didn't have comfort. I didn't have parents who came to help when I was sick or when he cried through the night. What I had was grit. And what he had was me. Only me. Gasps rippled again. Across the table, my mother's painted smile cracked. Someone coughed softly in the back. A chair scraped against the floor. But no one left. No one wanted to miss what came next. My son's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently, silently. A question, a plea, and a promise all at once. I squeezed back. I didn't name my parents directly. Not yet. But I let the weight of implication crush them in silence. There are people, I continued, who think they can walk back into your life when the harvest is plenty, forgetting they abandoned you during the planting, during the droughts, during the storms. They want the applause, the credit, the easy part of the story. But life doesn't work that way. You don't get to show up at the ending when you never endured the beginning. Every word was deliberate, each syllable measured. I could feel the audience leaning closer, eyes darting between me and the two stiff figures across the table. For a moment, I let my eyes flick toward my purse resting by my chair. The folder was still there, its leather edges pressing against the fabric, waiting. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Not yet. But I wanted them to see the glance. To wonder. To feel the dread crawling under their skin. Because revenge begins not with proof, but with fear. When I handed back the microphone, the applause was louder this time, genuine though laced with discomfort. Guests weren't sure if they were clapping for my resilience, or for the spectacle. It didn't matter. Every clap was another nail in the coffin of my parents' illusion. My father cleared his throat, muttering something to my mother, who dabbed at her lips with her napkin. They tried to act unfazed, but I could see it now, the cracks. His jaw clenched too tightly. Her pearls shook faintly against her collarbone. They were unraveling. And it was only the second act. Later, as guests mingled and moved toward the dessert tables, my son leaned close again. His voice was quiet but urgent. "Mom, what exactly did they do? What are you holding back?" His question pierced me, and for a moment I wanted to tell him everything. To unload the years of betrayal, the papers in my purse, the debts I'd uncovered. But I stopped myself. Not yet. Instead, I kissed his hand gently and whispered, "You'll know soon enough. But tonight, just remember. Nothing you've built, nothing you've achieved comes from them. Yours. And mine. Only ours." His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. His eyes shimmered with something between love and fury. The banquet wound down. Chairs shifted, coats draped over arms. People came by to congratulate my son, to shake my hand, to murmur words of admiration. But no one congratulated my parents. They sat quietly now, diminished, as though the spotlight had burned too hot. I let the evening close around them like a trap. Because this was never about one speech. Or one moment. This was about truth, and the truth was only beginning to surface. I could feel it pressing against me like a weight as the banquet carried on, laughter rising here and there, though none of it touched our table. My parents sat stiff, their eyes darting toward me in quick, nervous glances, then away again. I didn't speak to them. Not yet. Instead, I rested one hand casually on my purse, fingers brushing the smooth leather of the folder inside. Just enough for them to notice. And they did. I caught my mother's eyes, quick and sharp, dropping immediately to the bag. A flash of recognition, or was it fear? I couldn't tell. But it was enough to steady my breath. They knew I had something. They didn't know what. That was how revenge began. Not with a strike, but with silence. The waiters cleared the coffee cups, the clatter of porcelain loud in the uneasy quiet. The hospital director raised a toast, his voice full of gratitude, but I barely heard him. My pulse drummed in my ears. I shifted the folder out of my bag and set it on the white linen tablecloth. I didn't open it. I didn't even slide it forward. I just let it sit there, brown and worn against the gleam of polished silverware. The air around us changed instantly. Conversations at nearby tables faltered. My father's hand froze midway to his glass. My mother leaned back, her smile frozen on her face. I ran my fingers lightly along the edge of the folder, as if it were nothing more than an idle gesture. But I knew better. And so did they. My son noticed. His voice was low, curious, but edged with concern. "Mom, what's that?" I turned to him slowly, offering a smile that held more weight than reassurance. "Just something I've kept for a very long time," I answered. His frown deepened. "Why bring it here?" I looked at my parents as I spoke, never breaking their gaze. "Because tonight it finally matters." Guests shifted in their seats. A doctor's wife leaned toward her husband, whispering behind her hand. The room was filled with clinking glasses and murmurs, but at our table, there was only stillness, like a storm circling just beyond the windows. I tapped the folder once, softly like a heartbeat. My parents flinched almost imperceptibly. The hospital director tried to keep the evening flowing, inviting another colleague to share a story about my son's residency years. Laughter rippled at the far side of the hall. But here in the front, the air was thick, heavy, charged. Every detail was sharper now. The faint citrus of lemon polish on the tables. The crackle of microphones against their stands. Even the faint tick of my father's watch as his wrist trembled against the table. I leaned in, my voice low, just for my parents. "You remember these papers, don't you?" My father's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." My mother's voice came out higher than usual, a false laugh trembling at the edges. "Really, Margaret, you've always had a flair for drama. This isn't the time." But her eyes, those gave her away. Wide, darting, desperate. I didn't open the folder. Not yet. I simply slid it 2 inches closer to the center of the table. The scrape of cardboard against linen was louder than it should have been. My son shifted beside me, looking between us, his confusion deepening. He whispered, "Mom, you're scaring me a little." "What's inside?" I squeezed his hand under the table, steady, reassuring. "Not fear, sweetheart. Truth. That's all." The word truth seemed to land heavier than it should have. My parents both stiffened, their eyes flicking to the folder again as if it might spring open on its own. A colleague across the table tried to draw my son into a light conversation about his latest research, but the words fell flat. My son nodded politely, distracted, his eyes constantly coming back to me, to the folder, to the tension that everyone could feel but no one fully understood. I let the moment breathe. I wanted them to stew in it. Because suspense, I'd learned, was its own form of punishment. Finally, my father leaned forward, his voice low, his attempt at control strained. "What are you trying to prove, Margaret?" I met his eyes without blinking. "Nothing. Proof takes care of itself." My mother's hand shook slightly as she reached for her glass. "You don't have to do this," she whispered so softly no one else could hear. I tilted my head. "Don't I?" The host called for final remarks, the microphone passing down the line of tables again. A nervous laugh circled the room, guests clearly unsettled by the tension they couldn't name. When the mic reached me again, I stood slowly. My chair scraped against the floor, echoing too loud in the quiet. I held the folder in one hand close to my chest like a weapon not yet unsheathed. "My name is Margaret," I began again, voice steady but sharper now. "And I've carried not just my son, but the weight of truths no one in this room knows." Gasps, whispers, the scrape of a chair. I didn't open the folder. I didn't need to. Just holding it was enough. I turned, locking eyes with my parents. "You've hidden behind silence for decades. But silence doesn't erase paper. Ink doesn't forget. And signatures, I let the word hang, signatures live longer than excuses." My mother's pearls shook against her chest. My father's face had gone ashen. The room was still. Every eye was on us. I lowered the folder slowly, setting it back on the table in front of them. Then I sat, folding my hands in my lap once more. I didn't have to reveal what was inside. Not tonight. Not yet. The anticipation was enough. Because now they knew. And everyone else was starting to wonder. The folder sat there, brown and heavy against the white tablecloth, as though it had a pulse of its own. My parents kept their eyes fixed anywhere but on it. My mother fussing with her napkin, my father pretending to study the centerpiece of roses and baby's breath. But the way their shoulders tensed gave them away. They weren't fooling anyone, least of all me. A ripple of unease drifted through the hall. People had stopped laughing quite so freely. Forks hovered mid-air, conversations stalled in half-sentences. The tension was no longer ours alone. It belonged to the entire room. I leaned back in my chair, calm, almost casual. The folder didn't need to be opened tonight. Its presence alone had done the work. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because the applause tonight would belong to me. Not them. The hospital director cleared his throat nervously and tapped the microphone. "Let's continue with closing remarks. It's been a wonderful evening." His smile was thin, his eyes flickering toward me, then quickly away. He could feel the shift too, though he didn't dare name it. The microphone was passed down the row of tables. Doctors' wives spoke of pride. Colleagues praised my son's long hours and dedication. Each voice added to the weight of the night. And all the while I waited, my hand resting lightly on the folder, my eyes fixed on the two people who had once declared I wasn't worth keeping. Finally, the microphone reached me again. I stood slowly. My knees didn't shake. My voice didn't quiver. I had been preparing for this for 48 years. "I wasn't going to speak twice tonight," I began, my tone even, almost conversational. "But when you carry truth for this long, it finds a way out." The room hushed. Even the waitstaff froze where they stood, trays balanced in their hands. My son's achievements are his own. His sacrifices, his nights of study, his endless determination. That is his story. But every story has roots. And tonight you deserve to know mine. My son watched me closely, his expression unreadable but his hands clasped tight together on the table. My parents sat rigid like statues carved from ice. When I was 17, I was told I was nothing. That my mistake defined me. That carrying a child meant I forfeited my right to a home, to love, to parents. I was cast out into the cold with nothing but a borrowed coat and a child growing inside me. Gasps rippled across the room. Someone whispered, 17. Too loudly. "Yes," I continued, letting the truth settle into the silence. I worked nights in diners where the grease clung to my clothes no matter how many times I washed them. I scrubbed motel floors until my knees bled. I sold my wedding ring for rent money. And every dollar I earned went to raising a boy who grew into the man you celebrate tonight. My voice sharpened, cutting through the quiet. And I did it alone. All eyes shifted toward my parents. Their cover had slipped. Their practiced smiles were gone. My father's face flushed red, his jaw locked. My mother gripped the edge of her chair, her knuckles white. I let the silence grow, the judgment of strangers pressing down on them like a weight. "They want you to believe they had a part in this," I said, gesturing lightly toward them. "But they weren't there. Not when I was hungry. Not when he was sick. Not when I needed someone to tell me I wasn't worthless. They weren't there for any of it. Yet here they sit, smiling as though they've earned the right to share in this light." The room was still. The truth had cracked open and no one dared look away. Then it happened. My son rose to his feet. He didn't look at them, he looked at me. He took the microphone gently from my hand, his fingers brushing mine, steadying me in a way only he could. His voice carried strong and clear. Everything I am, everything I've achieved is because of my mother. No one else. She gave me life when the world tried to take it away from her. She gave me strength when she had none left for herself. She gave me everything. The room erupted into applause. Not tentative. Not hesitant. Thunderous. People stood. Chairs scraped against the floor. Hands clapped, voices cheered. But the applause wasn't for my parents. It wasn't theirs to take. It was mine. Mine after all these years. I stood frozen in the sound, the tide of it washing over me. My chest tightened, not with fear but with something heavier, vindication. For every night I had cried into my pillow, for every morning I had walked into a world that didn't want me, this moment was the answer. My parents shrank beneath it. My mother's face pinched with humiliation, her pearls trembling against her collarbone. My father sat stiff, his eyes fixed firmly on the tablecloth as though the roses in the centerpiece might swallow him whole. No one clapped for them. No one looked at them. They had been erased from the story in a single wave of hands and voices. But even in triumph I didn't smile. Revenge isn't about joy. It's about justice. I glanced at the folder still resting on the table. Its edges caught the light, brown against the gleam of silverware. My son hadn't noticed it this time. His eyes were only on me, but my parents had. They couldn't look away. And that was the point. The applause might have burned their pride, but the folder promised something more. Something they couldn't yet name but feared all the same. The hospital director wiped his brow, smiling too widely as he tried to regain order. "Well," he said into the microphone, voice cracking slightly, "I think we all know who deserves the loudest applause tonight." Laughter, cheers, another swell of clapping. And still none of it belonged to them. I sat, folding my hands calmly in my lap, while my parents remained silent, trapped in a cage of their own making. Afterward, as guests began to mingle again, people approached me one by one. A nurse hugged me tightly, whispering, "You're stronger than anyone I know." A colleague shook my hand, eyes shining with respect. Even the hospital board chairman leaned close and said, "You raised not just a son, but a legacy." Each word was a balm to old wounds. Each smile was a reminder that the lies my parents had built could no longer stand. And yet, as I stood there, surrounded by strangers' kindness, I felt my parents' eyes on me. Burning, desperate, calculating. They weren't done. Not yet. But neither was I. The applause had erased them publicly. But erasure wasn't the end I wanted. The folder still sat waiting. And soon, its pages would speak louder than any words I could say. The applause had ebbed into conversation, laughter slowly returning to the room. But at our table there was no laughter, no words. Only the weight of silence pressing down like a heavy curtain. My parents sat frozen, pale and stiff, as though they feared even a whisper might crack the fragile ground beneath them. I didn't touch the folder yet. Not while so many eyes still lingered. I wanted this to happen slowly, quietly. A storm that no one else needed to name but them, and me. When the final toast ended and guests began reaching for coats, I leaned forward and slid the folder directly in front of my parents. The scrape of cardboard against linen was louder than the applause had been. "Take it," I said softly. My father's jaw clenched, but he didn't move. My mother's hands trembled in her lap. Neither of them reached for it. "Afraid?" I asked, my voice calm, almost kind. "You should be." Later, in the parking lot, the air was cool, the sky stretched wide with stars. Guests hurried to their cars, heels clicking, doors slamming, engines humming. My son walked me to my car, his hand resting protectively at the small of my back. "Mom," he said quietly, glancing at the folder now clutched in my hand, "what exactly is in there?" I paused by the driver's side door, staring at his face, the face I had built my life around. He deserved the truth. Not the whole of it, but enough. Everything they tried to bury, I told him. Debts they left in my name. Forged papers to erase me from what little I was owed. Signatures they thought no one would ever see again. His mouth parted slightly. Anger flickered across his features, but I touched his arm before he could speak. "You don't need to fight this battle," I whispered. "It's mine. Always has been." He nodded reluctantly and kissed my forehead. "Just promise me, Mom, when it's done you'll let it go." I smiled faintly. "That's the plan." The next morning, I delivered copies of the folder to the courthouse. Legal documents, notarized and preserved, proof of everything my parents had tried to erase. The clerk raised her eyebrows as she flipped through the pages, whistling under her breath. "Where did you even find all this?" she asked. "Where they never thought I'd look," I answered simply. It wasn't hard. Years ago I had taught myself to keep records, to save every scrap of paper, every bill, every letter. My parents had counted on me being young, desperate, and forgetful. They had underestimated the strength of memory, my memory. By the end of the week it began. Their house foreclosed. Their savings, frozen. The debts they had hidden behind forged signatures came back to life, demanding repayment they could no longer escape. I didn't have to shout or gloat. I simply watched as the tide turned against them, as the same world they once used to crush me now closed in on them. Neighbors who had once admired their polished facades began whispering. The very same whispers I had endured decades earlier now followed them through grocery aisles and church pews. "Did you hear what they did? Did you hear what she found?" For the first time in my life, the shame wasn't mine to carry. One evening my phone rang. My mother's voice came through, small and trembling. "Margaret, please, you don't have to do this. We're old. We don't have anywhere to go." I sat at my kitchen table, the wood worn smooth by years of meals and homework and late-night tears. I stared out the window at the ocean, the waves rolling steady against the shore. "You had somewhere to go when you threw me out," I said evenly. "You had each other. You had your pride. And you chose it over me." "We made a mistake," she whispered. "We were scared. You were cruel," I cut in. "And now you're living with the cost of it." I hung up before she could answer. The silence in my kitchen was louder than her voice had ever been. Word spread quickly. Within days they were gone from their house, forced out with nothing but what they could carry. I heard through neighbors that they were renting a small room above a mechanic's shop on the edge of town. And still they didn't stop calling. The messages piled up, pleas, excuses, attempts to twist the story into something softer. But I never picked up again. Their voices had no power left. Meanwhile, life for me grew lighter. My son visited often, bringing coffee and pastries after his shifts, sometimes falling asleep on my couch mid-conversation. He never asked again about the folder. He didn't need to. He trusted me to carry it through. One night, as we sat together watching the waves outside my cottage window, he turned to me and said, "I've never been prouder to be your son." And for the first time in decades I let myself cry, not from grief but from release. Weeks later I walked past my old family home. The windows were dark, the paint peeling, the yard overgrown. For years that house had haunted me, the memory of its locked door pressing like a bruise on my chest. But standing there now I felt nothing. No longing. No ache. Just emptiness. Because it was no longer mine to fear, and no longer theirs to boast about. The silence was complete. The final blow came quietly. A letter in the mail, stamped official. The debts were closed. The papers had gone through. Everything they had once stolen, returned, reversed, erased. I set the letter down on my kitchen table, the same table where I had raised my son, fed him from chipped bowls, counted crumpled bills late into the night. The circle had closed. For years I had lived under the weight of their betrayal. But now the weight was gone. That evening I brewed a cup of tea and sat at the table by the window, listening to the waves outside. My purse lay on the counter, the folder finally empty, its purpose fulfilled. I thought about the girl I had been at 17, shivering on a doorstep with nowhere to go. I wished I could reach back through time, touch her hand and whisper, "Hold on. One day you'll win." And I had. The silence after the storm isn't empty. It's steady. It's the sound of survival, of justice, of peace earned the hardest way possible. My parents had taken my youth. But I had taken their legacy. And sitting there in the quiet I finally understood. Revenge wasn't about hurting them. It was about freeing myself. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply and let the silence settle. I was no longer the girl they abandoned. I was the woman who erased them. Thank you for watching my story. If this journey touched your heart or gave you strength, please subscribe. I share more powerful revenge and betrayal stories every week, and I'd love for you to be part of this community.